the different speakers, and the basic structure of the debate, basically.
That's right. Yeah, basically the structure of the format, and we had started discussing the speaker roles. So we have quite a lot to cover today. So we have to finish with the speaker roles in the next 15 minutes ideally, and then we'll go on to like the argumentation bit of it as to how to argue and what are the various types of motions, followed by how to rebut. Ambitious plan. Let's just try to do as much as we can. Cool. Um, Give me a second to just like share my screen and begin. All right, as far as the speaker roles are concerned, then, like I explained, the first speaker speech essentially consists of your framework, the setting up of the debate, which includes three components, which I explained in detail yesterday. Characterization, which is just definition of terms, because terms can mean different things to different parties involved, given that they are average reasonable voters and everybody has a different understanding of things. Secondly, so that's why in order to define terms and like to be on the same page as the other team and the adjudicators, you need to just clarify what you think these words mean before actually debating on them. That's the definition bit of things, and that's the rationale for why we have definition in the first place. But secondly, I told you status quo is extremely important. Status quo just being your understanding of where this debate is set in terms of, is it being set in like a context which is retrospective? Is it set in the past? Is it set in the present? Or is it something that's forward looking, so it's in the future, right? For example, if there were a new technology that was being introduced which does not exist yet in the society, but the motion is proposing that it might exist, for example, artificial intelligence taking over human labor or whatever, those kinds of concepts only apply to the future, right? Which is why you have to be clear on your status quo. This doesn't become status quo, then your context is then future and not the present, right? You can't say that artificial intelligence exists in the present, so your debate is essentially forward looking and futuristic in nature and context. But if there was a debate about, let's say, if there was a debate that was relevant to the pre-industrial world more, right, then it's by default in the past. So your context setting should be very clear in your head. Mostly debates are happening in the world that we live in today, and not necessarily in the past, until unless they particularly specify that we are coming from the past or you are an actor from the past. So in those cases, yes, those are the debates are retrospective, but essentially, generally, debates are happening in the now. When debates are happening in the present, there's further contextualization you need to give in terms of, even if they're happening in the present, where essentially is it happening in particular? Which is to say that if there is a debate that like concerns the developing countries more because it talks about poverty, talks about stuff that only developing countries are familiar with, then this debate applies to the developing world, even if the motion doesn't particularly mention developing countries. You should have that kind of a clarity in your head. Likewise, if there is some concern that deals with Western ideas, for example, what is exclusively Western? Yeah, like common but differentiated responsibilities. For example, the huge MNCs, the corporates, capitalism. Most of the times, any capitalistic motion or like things about like big, huge corporates exploiting the world, consumerism, all of this relates to the Western world more, essentially because the West generates all of these, like all of the big companies that you know are like from the West. This is not to say that the developing countries don't have those kinds of like cultures, like corporate cultures, but West is an active participant in these kinds of debates, right? I mean, I understand Samsung and all and Korea, they also come from those places and countries, but mostly it's the West, right? So that's how you decide where this debate is happening. Like I said, yesterday you ended up, all of you saying that, oh, this debate could happen in the universities, the schools. You can't take such random, but also so restrictive contexts. By context, I mean a wide ranging understanding of where is this debate applicable. Also, this is not to say that a debate cannot happen in the entire world, or that a debate cannot be relevant to two places at the same time. If you think this debate is relevant to human society and civilization in general, you can contextualize it like that. You don't have to restrict your debate to a particular country until and unless it is beneficial for you, or if you think it's definitely, I mean, relevant only to this part of the world. So why even engage with the other part when it's not relevant to them? Do you get it? So status quo is not like forcefully deciding which place this debate to happen in. It's just like choosing to make a call when it is necessary to make a call about a particular geographical understanding. Got it? All right. The third component that I explained, and this is still the revision bit of it, is stakeholder analysis, which I'm going to also expand on today. Stakeholders are like everything in a debate, and stakeholders are just basically people who are impacted by what you're debating on, right? So like if we were saying, like if you take a political debate, it's essential that government and the populace of the country, they are two very important stakeholders in a political debate, right? But you could also narrow down your stakeholders, like I said yesterday. Now, population is a very broad understanding of who my stakeholders are. You can narrow it down by saying that this debate is relevant to the population, but more so to the female voters, maybe, right? Or more so to the minorities which have been subjugated because of their caste in the past. So that narrow down, you can narrow it down according to what suits you the best and who you want to help through what you're proposing. Do you get it? So that's like your understanding of status quo and also the necessity of you making it clear in the first speech itself. Fair enough. That's pretty much what I said about the first speaker speeches yesterday. And yeah, so first speaker speeches are concluded. As long as you give these three components, followed by the three main constructives or arguments that your team is going to pursue, you're good to go. It's a good first speaker speech, all right? From both the sides. Now, if Prime Minister defines the status quo, like the terms and the motions, etc., the leader of opposition does exactly the same, but their work is still like lesser. If they agree with what the government side has said about their understanding of stakeholders, etc., they can just say that, okay, we concede to what the government is saying. It's okay. We have the same stakeholders. If you think it's like a bit uncharitable, they are being irrational in their understanding of status quo, etc., you can call that out as well as leader of opposition. You can say that we don't stand by this particular, like this bit of their definitions, and we differ by so and so means. So you just counter characterize, give a counter status quo understanding, those kinds of things as LO. On to the next speaker roles then, and let me just open that slide, which will help you understand better. Wait. Okay, yeah. On to the next speakers then. DPM and DLO, which is just like the second members from opening benches, right? What do they do? Whenever you're deputy, I don't care which format, it's mostly the analysis bit that's your responsibility, right? So whatever your side of the debate is about is already laid down by like your first speaker, if your first speaker was good. Now your responsibility is to just expand on things that have already been mentioned by your first speaker. For example, they make a couple of arguments, but they haven't given the various angles from which these arguments could be possibly perceived, right? That's your responsibility to just enrich the arguments with with relevant examples, to engage with what the LO might have said. I mean, also remember that as deputy speakers, you have already heard at least one speech from the other side, right? So you have some context on where the other side is going. You have to, so your primary burden as deputy speaker is to rebuild your case. What does that mean? I know what my case is. I know that the other side has tried to butcher it by that one speech that they have delivered before me. I have to rebuild it. I have to reinstate what my first speaker said as the relevant stuff in the debate. Okay. So it's just basically engagement with what we say, what they say, and how we are better. Bit of a comparison, right? Which your first speaker doesn't do. Your first speaker just like lays down whatever you ended up discussing in the case prep time. But your role is more dynamic insofar as you're listening to the other person, you're like absorbing what they're saying, and then also kind of adapting your case line to what the other side is saying. Do you get it? So sometimes what happens is that you identify a particular stakeholder, but you feel like the stakeholder, this identification on your part was a bit inappropriate because the stakeholder doesn't seem to be relevant to the other side. Don't stick to that stakeholder. If you get that kind of like a cognizance, which is belated, that this stakeholder wasn't the right stakeholder to choose, don't let it be an albatross around the neck where you have to carry that stakeholder just because you ended up thinking about this stakeholder as the relevant stakeholder during case prep. You can change the stakeholders. You can say, panel, okay, these were our stakeholders, but if opposition wants to focalize on these stakeholders, might as well do that. And then engage with their stakeholders more. If you think that's going to win you the debate. At the end of the day, they want to win the debate. Even if it has to be adapting to what the other side is saying because you think what the other side is saying is better or more true, you can, more true, not in terms of what they're saying is right, but their identification of stakeholders, etc. Then you can also like conceding to the like stakeholder analysis or status quo from the other side does not like lead to down marking on your side. Just remember that status quo characterization of terms and your stakeholder analysis is by and large value neutral. Do you get it? I don't do it. This is not the argument bit of things. So you guys can agree with each other, even if you're on the opposing sides, on who the stakeholders are, what the status quo is, because this is objective. Partially objective understanding, but also value neutral understanding. I'm not going to skew the facts about India if we are debating on India. It's okay for government and opposition to agree on what the characteristics of India are in their definition. That's okay for you to do. So don't just like balk to do it just because you think it's going to make it seem that you are giving into what the other side is saying. That's not an example of giving in. Giving in is when you start agreeing to their arguments. Agreeing to the definition is okay insofar as it is value neutral. Okay. So now the deputy has to rebuild the case. You have to say what your first speaker said still stands despite their speaker's rebuttals to your first speaker. Okay. That's one bit. Secondly, active rebutting is deputy's role, right? You have to actively rebut. If you're the DPM, you have to preempt or like think about what the DLO might say after your speech and what the LO has already stated and just try to rebut as much as you can. I will give you a structure of rebuttals, but like just to insert it here as well in case we forget later, there is a structure to rebuttals. Okay. Rebuttals isn't just like okay, let's just practice this. Okay. I'll just give you, I'll just put a motion in the chat just like yesterday for us to refer to for examples. Wait. Okay, I'll have to look for a motion. Give me a sec. Just a few seconds. The page is taking some time to reload. Okay, found a motion. So the motion reads, this house believes that foreign aid should primarily be given to international NGOs as opposed to directly funding states. I'm also putting it in the chat for whoever might have missed this. PHBT. Cool. Motion, okay. Just like somebody sent me a direct message and it went to them. Give me a sec. There. Please read the motion, seek clarifications if you have to, and then we'll continue. Also, somebody just quickly think of a smart argument from the government side so that I can tell you what the structure of a rebuttal looks like by rebutting it. Any argument. I mean, it doesn't have to be a smart argument. Sorry, I said that. Just like any random argument that you can think of from the government side. So the motion basically states, Harish, I'll take you in a second. The motion just basically states that foreign aid should be given to international NGOs, which will help all the countries and not necessarily to particular states who might need this funding. Do you all get it? Just give me a quick nod. Okay. All right, Harish, your argument?
A possible argument could be that international NGOs can compare with all third world countries around the world and understand the severity in certain countries and prioritize the usage of funds in those particular countries so that the people who need the aid can get it really efficiently.
Yeah, okay. All right. I got your argument. Others, please just like wait for a second because I won't be able to rebut many arguments at the same time. So if I were to give you like the structure of a rebuttal and how I should rebut it, a potential rebuttal and how I think most of like the inexperienced or rather like untrained debaters do this is just by like throwing around random statements as rebuttals. The rebuttals are absolutely ineffective if they are just like one-liners, just like the arguments. Arguments cannot be just random assertions that you're throwing around in the room. Likewise, rebuttals can also not be random claims, assertions, or even meaningful, but only one statement sort of a thing in the name of a rebuttal, right? That doesn't work. So how do you rebut stuff? There's like a structure to it. First of all, the first step in rebutting something is to reformulate the argument of the other side. Do you guys get it? So like if I want to rebut an argument, I can't just start saying that, oh, this side was saying so and so, and this is how I would like to rebut it. You reformulate the argument according to how you understand their point. Don't pervert the argument. Don't skew the argument deliberately. That's not what I mean. Okay, don't misinterpret it. Just interpret it like how they mean to say it, and then deal with it. Okay, so like if I were to say it here, I just like concisely put it. I'd say Harish on the other side is trying to say that international NGOs just have better intel to invest more meaningfully than a country individually can, right? I think my easy rebuttal to that could be, okay, first of all, then I have to set up a bit of a context to rebut, okay? You can't just get into the rebuttals. I can't say, no, what Harish is saying is absolutely preposterous, because I think countries do better for their people. International NGOs operate from afar, whereas countries are closer to the people. That's assertion, right? Why do you think somebody who's closer to you will take better care of you than an international NGO who's probably away, but like is better in terms of resources? Do you get it? Just me saying that, look, just because my country is closer to me, or my country's people in power are closer to me, they'll do better for me, is just absolutely preposterous and stupid from my side to say, if I don't explain why that stands. So the first step is reformulating the argument. The second step is telling the adjudicators how you intend to rebut. Okay, because there are ways of rebutting things, right? One way of rebutting is to absolutely deny what the other side is saying. You say that whatever the other side is saying is untrue. It's just objectively wrong, and it doesn't stand in the real world. It's a bit like a trip down the rabbit hole. Got it? Sometimes the arguments being made by the other side are that preposterous. So you can just deny them. You can say this is untrue, and you can say that it can be easily proven. Sometimes what the other side is saying, though, makes sense, right? They come from an informed point of view, such as Harish's argument. It's not bad, right? He says international NGOs have resources, right? They're better established than like states of a poor country. So maybe they have better ability to go ahead and invest meaningfully so as to ensure better returns. They have better R&D, research and development, whatnot. In which case, this argument is valid, okay? So I, as the opposition to Harish, cannot just go ahead and disprove or like say that this is untrue. I have to agree that what Harish is saying is possible. This is called concessions in rebuttals, okay? This is the other form of rebuttal that you can possibly give in a debate. I don't necessarily say that what the other side is saying is untrue here, because it's not. Other people are also rational debaters from the other side. So just because they're your opposition, you can't just keep saying that they are like wrong in everything they say. Sometimes they will be right in what they're saying. So I will concede. I will say, okay, what Harish is saying is likely. But hey, I think the benefits that we can derive on our side of the house are still more than what Harish will be able to derive from what he's proposing. Do you get it? Then I agree to what the other side is saying. But I also say at the same time that while both the alternatives might be good and possible, mine is still better. So give me the debate. That's another way of rebutting stuff, right? So he says that, oh, international NGOs are good because international NGOs have resources. I could say that, look, this isn't everything that you need to know about international NGOs. I think they are derailing the case when they just go ahead and say that international NGOs are all about like being resourceful. If they're resourceful, they're also biased towards the West because they were institutionalized by the West, right? If you talk about the World Bank, if you talk about the World Trade Organization, we think there is an obvious colonizer colonized binary that still exists, right? Wherein when the World Bank helps you, they also expect you to act according to them. I mean, I could easily establish that international institutions are still under like the aegis of United States of America, no matter how willing you are to like decline that and say they are like rational and unbiased actors. We can easily say, I mean, I could create a kind of framework where I villainize the international NGOs and say that they wouldn't always equitably divide resources, right? There's a lot of politicization that happens as well, insofar as if the US wants favor from a particular small country, they're likely to invest more in their development than some other African country which needs that investment more. Do you get it?
Didi, PBNG है अभी अभी क्या चल रहा है?
No, somebody unmute themselves. Okay, this is so disturbing, man.
अभी
Who's this? Oh, Arnav, you're unmuted. Okay, guys, please mute yourself. Let me see. Okay, fine. So I could say, so one way, so if I have to rebut this, I reformulate his argument. I say, panel, we are going to attack international organizations and give you a different perspective of what international organization NGOs look like. So that's my method of rebutting, right? You also have to clarify what is your method of rebutting, right? And then in the third step of it, your actual rebuttal transpires. Then my comparative would be that if international organizations and NGOs can be potentially biased, and I've already proven the propensity of that happening, I believe that countries are still more accountable to the people to their people, right? Which means if you give these funds to a country, and we understand that country, like the states of a particular of countries can also be corrupt, but then they're accountable for it insofar as many of our countries are democratic, right? So if my country does not ensure that there is a trickle down of the funds that they receive from the NGOs or from wherever they come, I mean, whatever funds they get, if that trickle down doesn't happen, then people can go ahead and retaliate in a democratic country, right? Which is where the idea of accountability is better on our side of the house, and also a surety of the funds reaching the poor people or the people in need is better on our side of the house. International organizations, you can't raise a voice against them, given that they are only bestowing a favor on you when they're giving you funds. So if they choose not to give you funds and they choose to give these funds to some other country which they portray as more needy, I can't do anything about it, right? Which means disproportionate development is more likely on Harish's side of the house. That's my rebuttal. Do you understand? My rebuttal does not happen in vacuum. It doesn't happen without me clarifying to the adjudicators what I'm potentially trying to say and where I come from. So your rebuttal also happens within a context. It doesn't happen like randomly. You just don't throw around arguments. I think potentially what most of us would have done, if you haven't ever previously debated, is that you would have said that no, countries are more responsible and the state governments are more responsible in a country. That is why we think they are better stakeholders to like distribute funds than international NGOs. Although that claim is very valid, unless you analyze it and contextualize it, it'll just fall flat if you have a strong opposition. Do you guys get the idea and concept of rebuttals now a little bit? Right? Okay. Sometimes, and this is another form of rebutting stuff, you can flip the argument. Okay. I mean, this is an interesting way of doing things because there's less work in these kinds of rebuttals. So let's say we'll have to change the example, though this motion doesn't necessarily function for this example. Okay, so we could possibly say this house prefers to impose carbon tax as opposed to mandating usage of public vehicles. Do you guys get this motion? Like one side will prefer carbon tax and the other side will prefer public vehicles as a means of bringing about like environmental sustainable development, whatever. Right? So if the government side says that, look, carbon tax is good because if you introduce carbon tax, people will voluntarily stop using their vehicles and they will have an active deterrent to not use their vehicles as much as they do, because they know that I have to pay for like every mile that I for every, and I will have to pay a tax commensurate to the kind of pollution I create, right? So there is an active inherent deterrent, right, for me to not use my own vehicles. Now the opposition, there is a burden of saying that public vehicles are better off, right? Wherein you could just go ahead and say, okay, just a second. You guys can't keep leaving the meet and just like coming in the waiting room. It's extremely disturbing. Okay. Just give me 1 second, please. Okay, flipping the argument, I'll explain later. I think I'm derailing a little too much from the speaker roles right now. Siddharth and Ranvijay, your hands are raised. Was it for like the argument that you wanted to share?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah.
Okay, so now, I mean, I just needed an example to just start a rebut thing, and now I'll take your responses sometime later now. Okay, that's about deputy speeches. I think you can rebuild the cases. You can give potential examples. I mean, just try to enrich the argument by the means of examples. By examples, I don't mean stats. I do not mean any data analysis. I mean reasoning only. I mean, finding as many possible reasons of substantiating something as much as there can be, right? So now I think I'll take one of your arguments because I want to tell you how you can diversify the same argument. Can you give me one example of whatever you were trying to say? I think I'll let Siddharth go because you raise your hand later. So like, just to be fair, yeah.
So I was going to talk about how you could characterize in your speech and say that in developing countries, which is where most of this aid will go, governments could potentially be corrupt. So a lot of the money that goes towards the aid may not actually end up with the people.
Okay, so now this is one. Okay, so they go ahead and say that, look, the state governments are potentially and more often than not corrupt, which is why the international NGOs are fine. Now, how do you diversify this argument? Now, maybe let's say Siddharth was your first speaker and you are the deputy. How should you deal with this argument if Siddharth has already made a point of like corrupt states, right? You as his deputy should know how to diversify the same argument. And what does diversification mean? I don't give you this sole example. I mean, he said that, look, propensity of corruption is more in state governments. He hasn't said a word about how international NGOs can also be corrupt because I have established that they are biased, right? So that kind of a diversification in terms of how you can't just say that, look, state governments in developing countries are corrupt, because opposition will run simple argument again of accountability, that at least this is my state government, right? I have some sort of an outreach to, I mean, I have some answerability to seek from them. International NGOs, I can't like approach them. One, because I am from a developing country, I am a poor person. I can't really get into the politicization of things, especially when they're such high-handed people I'm dealing with, right? I simply don't have the resourcefulness or access to go to international NGOs or like be up in arms against international NGOs in UN or whatever. That's a matter of privilege to retaliate also sometimes, right? So those kinds of arguments will come your way. You have to, first of all, as a deputy, deal with those kinds of arguments that the opposition will be giving you, such as the one I did about biased international NGO. But you shouldn't have to wait for the yellow to say this. You should anticipate that if Siddharth has said that state governments are going to be corrupt, opposition will mandatorily say that no, international NGOs have a better propensity of being corrupt because they have no accountability to you. But secondly, they are also like Western institutes, right? So they work according to Western interests. But thirdly, even if they are the best actors, let's say international NGOs have integrity and they're not biased in our worst case, right? Then still these international NGOs do not have any profound intel on how a particular country functions or what its peculiar needs might be, because they are not always actively engaging and on the ground with the countries, right? Which means if women empowerment is required, international NGO might just end up investing elsewhere, which they think is a dire problem in the country. So you could also create that kind of a rationale about why international NGOs will fall short. Diversification of argument then means that you don't just give one reason for why something might happen, you give 3, 4, right? So that even if one falls, you still have the other, other reasons guarding your case. So even if this argument about international NGOs being biased falls, I still have this argument in my worst case scenario where international NGOs are unbiased of saying that, look, even if international NGOs are the best actors, they don't have the intel that the state governments have about their own people and their own country, because the state governments are directly in contact and in touch and have an active obligation to give to the people. International NGOs are afar, but also less engaged with every country individually and specifically, simply because they have a lot of countries to deal with. So their their distribution of fund is very generic, right? And it's not targeted, because of which there is like the efficacy of the program just flounders. Do you guys get it? So it's like one argument diversified by in terms of how okay. So argument is just basically you saying that if you do this, this is going to happen. If international NGOs are allowed to fund rather than state governments, prosperity will happen in developing countries, right? If that is your cause and effect, I have an effect. I can't just give you one cause for how that effect will happen. If I want to prove that international NGO is the only way of ensuring prosperous developing countries, I have to give you 4 or 5 reasons and mech for why that is likely, right? Because 1 or 2 will definitely fall. Also, if you diversify your arguments like this, if you give 4 reasons for the same consequence, it's more work for the other side, right? Slow speakers won't be able to deal with all of your points, which means that even if 2 of your points fall, 2 still stand. Which is why I'm saying that deputy's role is to diversify the argument, is to look at it from various perspectives, not stick to the only thing that the first speaker has said. Please ensure that you as the deputy do not become repetitive. Okay, don't just keep saying the same thing what the first person says. Now, Siddharth said something about corrupt governments, and I really elongated the argument by taking it in different directions. That's exactly what the deputy is supposed to do. I hope that makes sense with the examples. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Perfect. So with that, we're done with first 4 speeches, right? On to the closing half. This is how the first half is done, okay? So all the setting up that's required in the debate, everything happens in the top half. The closing half then is for an advanced case line to happen on the same debate, on the same motion, right? I'm looking for like better extensions to enrich the debate, which has already happened in the first half. So what does like the member speeches look like? What do the member speeches look like from like MG and MO, member government, member of opposition? Both of them have the same kind of responsibilities. So let's just cover it collaboratively, right? Member of government begins their speech ideally by mentioning how they take it over their opening bench. Do you get it? So if I'm closing government, I will say opening government said so and so, but I think we will take it over them because we extend our case using so and so arguments. I have to make it clear what are my exclusive extensions that I'm bringing to the debate. Do you guys get it? Because one way that the only way that you can win at CG and CO is by proving that you have some novelty in your case which your opening bench did not already touch upon. Do you get it? Some points that are exclusively your own. Yeah, right. So if, for example, OG in this debate about international funding, like the one that we were talking about, OG has already mentioned the likelihood of corrupt state governments. CG, you can't begin by like harping on about corrupt governments again, because that's already covered by OG. Don't touch it. Okay. Find a new argument, right? Find a new dynamic which will help you prove that NGOs are a better bet than than like the state governments. Can you find Avi, mute yourself? Are you asking a question? Can you give me one extension from government side which you think you can run in CG because it hasn't already been discussed between Harish, Siddharth, and myself in the previous discussion? Advait?
Not that. I just had a question. What happens to the MG, MO, GW, and OW if the opening government covered all the points possible in that debate? And
That's never the case. I mean, how could one possibly exhaust all the discussion points in a debate? That doesn't happen. It's just about like practice, and with practice, you know how to find newer directions.
And does the government whip and opposition whip like function as a whip for the entire government side and opposition side, or just their?
No, just their side. I'll tell you how whip speeches work. There's like a definite structure for it. I'll come to that. Yeah, I'll take Ranvijay followed by Shyam.
Right. So in this case, I'd like to sort of like what I'm about to say might work as a refutation of your refutation of Siddhant, right? So the fact is, if you analyze the history of, I'm saying in reference to the motion we just had, right? So if you look at the history of countries that that require aid, we realize that they've been requiring aid for a long time. Most of them, that is. So, I mean that that's pretty much because most of the times this aid is normally given to the governments. So it is simply because these governments have been ineffective or have been corrupt, that ineffective at distributing the aid properly or have been corrupt, that this cycle of them requiring aid is perpetuated, right? Because
yeah. So okay. Now this is an argument. There are two ways of looking at it. One, if Ranvijay would have said this differently, I would have thought of it as a new argument, an extension. But how he puts it is like his refutation to my refutation of Siddharth's argument. In which case, I think it's an extension of the point on corruption, right? If you want to extend OG case line, for example, if you want to extend the corruption point, but from a newer angle, where you're saying that even, I mean, this will be an elongated process, and this will drain the international NGOs of the funds that they have available, right? Which isn't fair. Insofar as if I am giving the funds to somebody, I should know where their funds are being expended, because it's at the end of the day, my funds, right? And I am the one who accumulate it and like procure it the way I do. So this is a good argument to run. It is a separate principal extension on your side, where you can say that it is principally legitimate for international NGOs to like take control of distributing funds insofar as they are the ones who procure the funds, right? The state governments can just be using the money because they have no obligation to prove to they did not procure the funds, right? If you just keep giving it to the state government, you can prove the principal legitimacy of it. Like I said, this house believes that motion, which means value. Any THBT debate is a value judgment debate. Do you guys get it? You don't discuss so much the actions in THBT debates. You discuss the principal value of doing something. Is it principally correct for international NGOs to intervene in a country's affairs? You could run this extension at CG saying that, yes, it is principally plausible as well as agreeable if international organizations, international NGOs go ahead and seek that accountability from state governments insofar as it is the international NGOs' money that is being invested. And according to how the countries invest this money, the international NGOs will will like invest the next time, keeping in mind how this money was used the previous time, right? Is their prerogative to do that. So good argument, but you get how, I mean, framing is also a very important part in CG. How you frame it also makes it either look like an extension or just like a derivative of the first case. So be very careful of saying that panel, we differ by so and so means. Do you get it? Okay. So how many of you thought that what Ranvijay was saying was derivative of Siddharth's point? Give me a show of hands. Okay. And how many of you thought when I redid, I mean, when I redo Ranvijay's arguments, it seemed less derivative because I made it a principal argument? So I think you get the idea of how extensions have to be made clear, right? Sometimes adjudicators can be foolish. I mean, I'm not saying it from a place of like haughtiness or where I think that I am a better adjudicator. I'm just saying even I can be fooled into thinking when they are smart speakers that that what CG is running is derivative, even when it is not. So it's a lot about how you display your arguments as well. Just like frame them differently. Okay, don't let it in their adjudicators' wildest dream seem like a derivation of OG case, right? So otherwise, Ranvijay, really nice try. I think this was a nice extension to think of on the spot.
So would adding on any new points to the previously stated argument be counted as a new extension, or would it
It
just
can be, but again, like I said, you have to be smart. You have to tell me what your extension is to the already existing argument from OG, but also why this extension or this bit of analysis to the same argument is more important than what OG had said. Do you get it? So like if OG said something about like corrupt governments and you give a different kind of analysis, you say governments, even if they're not corrupt, they can be just slow, right? Because they don't have any active obligation to answer to the international NGOs. Now, this is an extension of what has been said by OG, but you can prove that the analysis that you bring to the same argument is better because you are saying that international organizations have the right. So, I mean, right also proves the principal legitimacy of things, right? Which is why your argument becomes more important than OG argument, because OG argument does not prove principles and THBT motions are mostly about principles. Yeah? Yes, no, maybe. What were you saying? I mean, I need some confirmation if you ask me. Yeah.
I have a question really.
Just a second.
Sure,
There's a lot of hands raised, so I'm going to take it one by one. Whoever has a question, keep your hands raised. Whoever was waiting to make an argument, please like lower your hands for now because I need to address the questions. Yeah. Okay, Arnav.
Yeah, no, it accidentally did.
Okay. Anika, is there a question?
Yeah, so do the member of the government and the member of the opposition also first like define the important terms and then again mention the stakeholders that they agree with or all of that, or do they just directly start with the argument?
If OG and OO were good in your room, then there will be no need to do reinvent the wheel. They have already established whatever there was to establish and set up the debate. You wouldn't have to do it. But sometimes both OG and OO benches were really like unfulfilling because they were, I don't know, novice teams. They did not know anything about characterization. Sometimes they end up just skipping characterization at all because maybe they're new to VPs or whatever. In that case, CG and CO, it becomes CG CO responsibility to just like do it because nobody ended up doing it before them. But mostly it's OGO responsibility. You don't have to do it all over again as CG CO.
So do you like agree or acknowledge it, or do you just directly start with the extensions of the argument?
You could agree and acknowledge it. I mean, if you think that it's pretty obvious that, I mean, yeah, I mean, if you think that there's a bit of characterization that you would like to introduce that has been missing so far in the debate, you're free to do that. If you think your characterization will make the debate better because you have a different kind of an interpretation of what international organizations look like, for example, it's okay. So like till now, OGO maybe have been discussing international NGOs in terms of them being Western institutes and them being resourceful. If you want to bring about a different perspective, let's say of saying that international NGOs, what could be a different dimension? That international NGOs are also supported institutes, right? So they have better funds than, I mean, they're supported institutes basically, which means a lot of countries support them, right? And like if they know that this country is associated to this international NGO, then we also have like the goodwill of those other countries that think of international NGOs as good. Do you get this argument?
Yeah.
then that is like a new dimension of international NGOs and a new understanding of international NGOs, which opening has not touched upon. So you can do that. You can introduce that new layer of characterization if that helps you win the debate.
All right.
Sometimes better
And-
characterization can also help you win the debate, by the way.
And same goes with the stakeholder part also, right? Like if you agree, then you just go about, and if you don't, then you state something.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. So your extension could be dealing with an absolutely new stakeholder who nobody was talking about so far, right? For example, let's just say nobody talked about USA in this debate as a stakeholder, and you ended up talking about it in CGCO. Then definitely, yes, you win this debate if you are able to prove the validity of the stakeholder and also run valid arguments based on the stakeholder.
All right, got it. Thank you.
You're welcome. Ran, Vijay, is there a question?
Yeah. Firstly, just to clarify, so in the vast majority of motions, we debate the principle more than we debate the nitty-gritties of the hows and whys, right?
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
There's
Okay.
a question.
That's one. And number two is, could we have some like down to earth practical tips of how to like go about introducing a new dimension to a debate, which essentially has, because several debate motions really have one core argument. I mean, one core argument, one base for and against, right?
Not necessarily. I think I might have
Um,
to beg to differ there. So you
Okay.
are okay. The number of arguments that you can come up with, essential, at least for me as a debater, relies a lot on how many stakeholders I can identify. Do you get it? If I can identify 5 stakeholders, there are five things that would come to my mind about what the impacts of this particular proposition is going to be. If I have only 2 stakeholders, my perspective gets restricted. If I'm only talking about international organization and the developing country dynamic, I will not be able to insert bigger countries in the debate and say how if you are helped by international NGOs, your credibility as a smaller country increases, which is why the other countries, for example, USA, France, the countries that have the right and the incentive to separately invest in you, they will also would want to invest in you because now the international NGO trusts you and they trust the international NGO in turn, right? How did I come up with this argument? Only when I thought about giving a new actor to Anika because she asked for it, right? I couldn't think of that argument when I was discussing the same motion with you guys before. But because Anika like forced me to the extent where I had to look for a new stakeholder, I also ended up thinking of a new argument with the stakeholder. So with every new stakeholder, you will find a new argument, which is why keep your spectrum of stakeholders broad and large and receptive in order to have like an array of arguments to choose from. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much.
You're welcome. So that.
So I just have, my question is sort of twofold. Firstly, as closing government or closing opposition, how aggressively would you point out flaws in opening government, like in the same sides as yours, the opening sides, like if they made a case, how aggressively would you point
I
out
wouldn't
flaws?
do it
Like, would you-
aggressively at all. I'd be very diplomatic because you don't want to knife your opening, which means that even if they have like absolutely butchered your side of the house and you are embarrassed of them, you don't let it show. Right? So you just, if you think that they have embarrassed you, just like how you do to a family member, you just stop talking about it, right? Or you don't just engage with it at all. You don't go ahead and tell them that they're bad because they're going to come back at you and adjudicators will see you for it, which isn't what you want. So you don't, I mean, you want to win over your opening half, for which the only thing you have to do is modestly prove how you were better. That's the only thing that you have to do. If you want to be aggressive, unleash that part of you when you are engaging with the other side of the house.
Right.
Right?
And so that's the second part of my question. As closing opposition or closing government, you will also rebut points made by the opening of the other half, right? Like your rebuttals don't need just to be, like if you're closing opposition, you don't just need to rebut member of government speech. You can also rebut prime minister or
Yeah, definitely, sure. So if you're like closing, okay, these questions would have been clear had we like discussed with speeches already. I'm going to do that and then you will understand how it goes. So you have to imperatively engage with all the benches. So if I am OG, even if I don't know what CG and CO are likely to say, if I am smart on, I mean, I'm a smart team and I know how OG and like benches work in PP, I will closely listen to the CGPOI to me. COPOI to me, right? Because that's the only way of CO engaging with OG. And then I will predict what CO is likely to say based on that POI. Do you get it? and who their stakeholders are, and accordingly preempt, right? Even before them making an argument, I say, if this is what CEO is going to say in their speeches, they might, I think it's important for them to understand so and so is the case, which is why we don't think that kind of an argument will stand. Do you get it? Even at OG, you have to engage with CEO even before listening to the speeches. That happens through prediction, through the POI. So like everybody is engaging with everybody, no question about that. You can't run your cases in isolation. You also can't like overlook a particular bench. It'll cost you. Cool. Okay. Let's move on. If there are no more questions, yes, let's go on to, okay, let me just conclude the member speeches then. Member speeches primary role is to introduce extensions. Secondly, you have to probably talk about the opening half as well. What do you think were the problems in general in the opening half debate? Why, how do you make it better by what you're saying, right? You could engage in this case with your own opening side. You can say that, look, our opening side said so and so, but we don't think they were able to rebut effectively to the other side, which is why we are going to do it. And then you rebut OO and say, we take this debate over OG because we engage with their own direct clash better than they themselves did. Do you get it? So like, that's one way of engaging with the opening half. But members, of course, are also engaging with their immediate clash, which is like, if I'm a member of government, I'm engaging with CO. If I'm MO, I'm engaging with CG. So that's also there. But like, again, member, the unique responsibility on member is of extensions. Otherwise, it's much like the deputy speech, analyze, rebuild case, this, that. Okay, on to the whip speeches. I think whip speeches are the toughest because, and I mean, I'm not trying to scare you off, but like, for me, it's like the toughest given the kind of thinker I am, because you have to be very mindful of all that's been run in the previous 6 speeches that you've already heard and lent your ears to. So in the whip speech, and I think there is always a structure that needs to be followed in a whip speech, otherwise it'll be all over the place given the data that you have on you to like rebut. There's so many speakers that have gone before you. The ideal way of going about whip speeches and the imperative in whip speeches is weighing. Okay, so weighing is just basically me comparing my case. If let's say I'm government whip, okay, if I'm government whip, I will first compare my case with OG CG clash. I will deal with that first. Let's say if I've been given 5 minutes, I give 1 minute 20 seconds to each bench. I will say I'll set goals for myself as the whip speaker. I will say in the first 1 minute and 20 seconds, I have to take down OG as CG. How do I do that? I say, panel, this is what OG said. This is what CG says. We think our extensions add value because they rebut OO better, which was OG's responsibility essentially. But we also think that our case is essentially one which talks about this dimension of this stakeholder, which was hitherto not talked about or touched upon until our speeches happened, right? So you take down OG that way. First, you take down OG, your opening side. Then you come to OO. Why do we take it over OO then? We said this, OO said this. We think we still take it over them for so and so reasons, whatever those reasons might be. And then you come to CO. CG versus CO. Why do we think we take it over them? CO said this, we said this. We think we take it over them because of so and so reasons. Basically, whip speeches are not whip speeches at all if they are not weighing and comparing constantly. Do you get it? You can't keep like you can't deliver a whip speech like any other speech. Say random stuff. You can't. You have to be comparing stuff. So whip speeches, and you will have a lot of adjudicators tell you this, is just a basically biased adjudication of sorts. Do you get it? If I were to make my side win, and if I was the adjudicator, how would I look at this debate? That's how you're supposed to deliver a whip speech. Now imagine a situation where an adjudicator is trying to justify their verdict, but they're constantly talking about only one side and the side that lost, but they're not talking about the side that let's say the adjudicator is only talking about the side that won and not necessarily about the side that lost. How would the side which is losing feel about the adjudicator? They'll downmark him probably, or her or them, right? Why? Because, okay, you let the other side win, but also tell us what our shortfalls might be, right? Like, don't keep swooning over the side that won. It's exactly the case with the whip speech. Mostly what people end up doing is that they keep saying that, oh, our case is excellent, our case is like par excellence, but they never tell you why that is the case or why on a comparative you win. Comparison, I don't know, write it down somewhere. In a whip speech, if you're doing it, comparison is like God. You can't do a whip speech without comparison. If you do it, it just doesn't make sense. It's like any other deputy speech or whatever speech, and it's also less effective. I'm not good at delivering whip speeches myself. It just comes with practice, but weighing is a must. in which case you should constantly be aware of what my previous benches said and how I'm better like than them. Two things. Opposition whip has a similar role. You engage with you engage with the OG CO clash first as to how we take it over OG, right? Which is your long diagonal clash. Long diagonal opponent, yes. I mean, yeah. And then COOO as to how you take it over your own opening bench, and then why you take it over CG, okay? So that's pretty much it about the speaker rules. Give me 1 second now. I think we covered as much as I would have liked us to in this hour. So it's good. Any questions? None? Yes, Anika.
How do you go about with POIs? Like you said that the long clashes, they are the ones who actually ask POIs, right? So when is that done, and is there a reply speech too?
Okay. So how the structure of, I mean, this is me telling you what a debate room looks like the moment you are allocated and the draws are out. You go to the room, the adjudicators there, they tell you to give you introductions. In the introductions, you can specify your preferable mode of taking POIs. So like if you want them in the chat, you can just say, please put my POIs in the chat. If you want them to, like, if you want your opponent to unmute themselves and say, I have a POI, that's fair as well, as long as you mention it and clarify. Okay, they will respect your preferable mode of taking a POI and ask you the POI the way you would like them to. Then how are POIs taken and like answered? When you started your speech, no matter which speaker you are, in the first and the last minute of your speech, you do not have an obligation to take a POI because that's called your protected time. Which means that in the first and the last minute, nobody will disturb you with the POI. If they do, you can just tell them not to because it's a protected time. You only take the POI then in for this particular qualifiers that we're having, IDL BP qualifiers. You will take the POI. I mean, the floor will be open for POIs for 3 minutes. So between your first and the last minute, how many minutes do you have? 3 minutes, right? So in those 3 minutes, anybody can ask you a POI without heckling. If they heckle, you can tell them to not heckle. Right? So I can say POI, Anika, you can say yes, tell me what it is, and then that's how it is. You answer it then after I've asked you the POI. One very important thing that I need to tell you about the POIs is that your POI cannot be a 4-page long speech. I mean, that ends up happening, right? POIs are not given to you for you to prove your point. It's given to you so that you can ask a relevant question to the other side. So don't go about saying, oh, this data says this, that data says this. So how do you claim this? That's not how it is done. Your POI cannot be longer than 15 seconds. If you have to write it down to make it fit in 15 seconds, adjudicators don't much care about how you do, like ask your POIs. As long as they're 15 seconds long, it's good. If they're not, I mean, it's just not thought of as valid. Sometimes adjudicators might even stop you from asking the POI if it's too long, right? So that's pretty much it about POIs. I don't think there's anything else that I could possibly clarify for you guys, except that asking POIs becomes all the more important to your long diagonal clashes. I told you that, right? Like OGCO only means of engagement is POIs. So you can't skip asking POIs or answering POIs in that clash. Also OOCG, only way of engagement is POIs. So you can't just overlook a POI. Also, under performance pressure, don't end up taking POIs from your direct clash. Sometimes it so happens. I am OG, but I end up taking a POI from OO, whereas I don't have to because I'm listening to the speeches, I can actively rebut them, right? What I need to do is prioritize taking a POI from CO because OO I will deal with, they are giving their speeches with mine. But CO, I haven't had the chance or will not have the chance in this debate to hear from, which is why I should prioritize a POI from CO always over my direct clash. Do you get it? Your preference should always be your long diagonal. So if I'm OG, my preference will be POI from
CG, a CO.
Closing opposition.
Yeah. And if I'm CG, my preference for POI should be ideally.
Oh,
Oh,
Fair enough. Okay, we get it. Cool. What else that might help you? Okay, quickly brushing over the types of motions in the last 4-5 minutes that we have left. Somebody said, I think it was, Ranvijay, somebody said that mostly the debates about principles. That's by and large true. There are a couple of I mean, there's types of motions. For example, THBT. THBT basically is value judgment, which means please don't question feasibility in THBT motions. So, for example, this motion said that international NGOs should be allowed to fund over state governments. You can't, I mean, as opposition, you can't say that, oh, because international NGOs can't do it and it is not feasible for them to do it, this debate is, I mean, we take this debate. You can't question the feasibility of something happening in THBT motions, which is why these are principle and value judgment debates. Not questioning feasibility is just you assuming feasibility. Okay. So like in a THBT motion, you have to assume that what the motion is saying can happen. Don't go ahead and say that, oh, we don't have the technology for this to happen. So this debate ultimately falls, because if that were the case, we wouldn't have given you the motion in the first place, right? Don't question feasibility in value debates such as THBT because it's already established. So the debate is not about whether something can happen. The debate in THBT motions is about if this could happen, would you let it happen on principle grounds? Got it? Right? Okay. On to other types of motions. Then you have this house will motions. Okay. This house will do something, let's say X, and X could be a variable, right? Now, this house would do something, this house will ban something, let's say cosmetic surgery, this house will ban cosmetic surgery. All of these kinds of motions require you or like ask from you, I mean, would always call for you to give a model. Okay. You have to give a model. Now, what is a model? Whenever you propose something, you have to prove feasibility in this debate, which means that if I'm saying that something will happen, I have to prove that the likelihood of this something happening is high. Do you guys get it? So like, if I think I want to ban cosmetic surgery, I also have to have a way of proving that, look, banning cosmetic surgery is not a trip down the rabbit hole. It is something that the governments will allow. It is something that the bigger companies who actually facilitate cosmetic surgery wouldn't have a problem with. It is also something that people model who like advertise for cosmetic surgery as a way of life, or perhaps something that science prefers to you and something that you should celebrate, will not have a problem with. Which means that in a THW motion is diametrically opposed to a principal motion or a THBT motion, insofar as a THW motion would always ask for feasibility. And it is okay for opposition to ask for feasibility. In a THW motion, it is okay for people to ask for feasibility because that's what you're expected to do in there. You have to tell me the how of it. You have to tell me the mech of something happening. Is there a possibility of what you're proposing happening in the first place? Those kinds of things. So THBT and THW are just like diametrically opposed to each other in terms of what what are the obligations that this type of motion puts on you. Give me 1 second. Yeah. So now on to the other types, which is like simpler. Okay. As long as you keep in mind giving model in THW and running principles in THBT, others are pretty simple. If it is a this house regrets motion, right? And I hope you guys are writing it down somewhere if you're listening to these for the first time. This house regrets motion. In a this house regrets motion. So let's say you have this house regrets A being a variable. It could be anything. This house regrets the rise of true crime genre. This house regrets the rise of what? Cancel culture. Could be anything, right? So when you regret the rise of something, on government, you have two responsibilities according to the type of motion. One, you give me the regret metric. Why do you regret the rise of something? Why do you regret that particular thing? What is your problem with this thing? But on a second level, and this is less intuitive, so keep in mind this, on a second level, you also have to give me a replacement for what you regret, which means that by regretting something, you're creating a vacuum. How do you then choose to fill that vacuum from your side of the house? This is called a counterfactual. If I regret something, I also have to give a way of filling the vacuum by replacing this thing that I regret with something else. So if this house regrets A, it's government's responsibility to regret A and give me the reasons for why you regret A, but also at the same time give me an alternative B, which will replace A and will be more effective than A. For example, this house regrets private schools in developing countries. If you regret private schools because they're elitist, they're expensive, they take away the pressure from the governments to make public schools better, that's okay. I understand why you regret it now, but you also have to tell me what you're going to replace it with. For example, I could say, panel, on our counterfactual, on our alternative, by regretting private schools, we'd just like to make sure that public schools are elevated to the level of what private schools are today. And we think government will be pushed to do this, because of which we think elimination of private school is good for both privileged people as well as underprivileged in a country. Which is how you, ensure that it's a holistic case in a this house regrets motion. I think that's the only clarification that you need on DHR, except one more thing. In a THR motion, you always have to keep in mind this, that it's a retrospective debate, which means whatever you are regretting already exists. This house regrets the rise of true crime genre. If this motion has been given to you, this is to say that true crime genre has been on the rise for a while now. So you are retrospectively looking at things and assessing things. Do you get it? THR motions are never about like future stuff. It's always about stuff that's happened already in the world, the kind of problems it has created, and you regretting that particular thing because you are aware of the problems that this particular thing has created. And that's why the regret, right? Okay. Manveer, I'll take you in a second. I'll also have like a couple of types left. So I'll just wrap this up. This house supports and this house opposes. Two types, very similar. It's harms versus benefits analysis debate. Okay. So in this house supports, when you this house supports X being a variable. This house supports the rise of true crime genre. This house supports this house supports benevolent dictatorships over weak democracies, those kinds of motions. In these types of motions, it's always you saying that, look, benevolent dictatorships, if I'm supporting them, have many benefits with which eclipse the harms of which eclipse the harms of benevolent dictatorships. Do you get it? So it's a comparative. You say that the benefits derived from benevolent dictatorships are more, and the harms of weak democracies are absolutely unmitigated. Do you get it? That's how you go about it. So it's always harms versus benefits. You enlist the benefits of the thing that you support and you enlist the harms of the thing that you oppose. You always make it a comparison and say that we understand if something exists, there's always an upside and a downside to it. Don't just say that what you're supporting is God, that it's like inviolable. It never is, right? Anything that you are debating on is always questionable insofar as nobody is perfect. That's the perception you go with. So your burden as a debater is not to make the world the best. Your responsibility is not to give the best. It's to give a better perspective than the other side. So don't always cling to your person or your side being the best. Just like stick to making your side of the world just a little bit better than what the other side's world looks like. Do you get it? Because this house supports motion, I think most of the times what I have seen debaters do is that they say that whatever we support does not have any harm at all. Don't create that godlike a godlike characterization of the thing that you support, which you won't be able to back, because nothing is as innocuous and harmless as you project it to be. Just say that, okay, we support this and we understand there are harms, but we think the harms are all the more accentuated when it is the other thing that we're proposing. Do you get it? Is that understood? Yes, no, maybe.
Got it.
Yes.
Fair, thanks. After which I have another I knew of another type, I'm forgetting. Yeah, this house as somebody or some movement. Okay, now this is an actor motion. When you are given a portfolio of sorts, but then don't think of this as MUN. Okay, like MUN is different. You're just given a country, you stick to it. In an actor motion, you become somebody. Like this house as Gandhi would allow violent defense in the non-cooperation movement. Now this is a motion set in the past, right? But you're Gandhi in this. In which case, in this debate, you can't think of any other stakeholder as more important than Gandhi, because you yourself are Gandhi. So in an actor motion, the actor that you are is the most crucial person who you have to cater for, even if it leads to all kinds of problems for the rest of the world. Your obligation lessens in an actor motion because you only have to think about the benefits of the actor. For example, this house as Ambani would not pay, let's say, a carbon tax or something. Now, as long as you're able to prove that Ambani or any other corporate giant will have some benefits of not paying a carbon tax, for example, economic prosperity, better business prospects, etc., it's okay. Even if the environment is going to hell and the country is suffering, that's not your burden to prove in this debate, at least, because you are the corporate giant. And as a person, your interests is only restricted to proving the best, bringing about the best possibilities for this particular actor that you are in an actor motion. Do you get it? So even if it's causing harm to the others, we don't really care as long as our actor is happy. But our actor can also have different responsibilities. So don't just start describing stupid self-interest or incentive structures for actors. Actors can have principal interests as well, right? As a person who's, as a trainer for you all, My incentive could be definitely some financial prospects, right? So I get paid by somebody to get to do something, but also like my principal obligation, right? I want you all to think of me as like a capable debater who is able to share whatever knowledge they have been able to accumulate, right? So it's not like I will be so self-seeking that, I mean, you can't run the kind of argument saying that, oh, people always do stuff for money and they will always throw principles, always throw caution to the wind when it comes to principles. That's not always the case. Everybody has a principles incentive and obligation which they want to stand by, right? Also stuff like image management, image formation is important for corporate giants as well. If they choose not to pay a carbon tax, people will think of them very critically, and people becoming critical of you as a corporate giant, that's the worst thing that can happen to you, because market is run by people, right? So you don't want to antagonize people. Does that make sense? So don't think of it with blinders on when you're thinking of actor incentives. Like I said, in this case, there's only one actor that you need to defend. So how do you diversify your argument then, given that I have previously stated that having many actors leads to diversification? Even if you have one argument, look for the many incentive structures that a person can have, right? My incentive in life is to live well, but then I also have like to study well, to perhaps I don't know, pursue some skill enhancement. I could have multiple incentives in life, right? We don't just run by one incentive. We are not fueled by one incentive. So in an actor motion, it's about identifying incentives and working on them and delivering them for the actor that we are, be it Gandhi or anyone else, right? Like the examples that I gave. Cool. I think with that, we can call it a day. If there are questions, I'm happy to answer. If not, you guys can go attend your classes if you have any. Manveer, yes.
Okay, so in a this house regrets motion, you said that we need to make a regret matrix, right? So in that regret matrix, is there something specific that you think should be pointed out in some way that could like help us to actually present our statements and make it like improve it better in any situation? Like something that we should always look out for when we're making a regret matrix.
No, there's no specification that I can give you as such. When you regret something, you just have to give us the reasons for why you regret it. But the reason cannot be small. It cannot be, let's say this house regrets the rise of true crime genre. You can't say that, oh, a very small section of the population, let's say children are scared by watching true crime. Now your regret metric is very restrictive if you say only children are scared by watching true crime, right? Because children is a very small part of the populace which anyway would not be allowed to watch true crime if parents are watching over, right? There's like PG ratings and whatnot on Netflix to prevent that from happening. So your regret metric has to be wide ranging. Try to say that we regret it because it harms not one section of the population, but the entire population mostly. Do you get it? That just gives more validity to your arguments, because now you're able to prove that we regret it not because of one reason, but because it's an inconvenience to everybody who might be like exposed to this thing, right?
Yes, thank you.
You're welcome. Anaisha, I'm sorry for mispronouncing your name.
No, that's correct. Okay. So in a household regret type of motion, you told that the government has to also give a solution about the problem which they're regretting. So is it the opposition's job to prove that the solution is wrong and the original idea was better?
Yeah, precisely. So, you know what? What is opposition defending in a THR motion? They're defending status quo. So like when you regret something, like I said, if you're regretting something, it's already happening in the world. You will never regret something that hasn't yet happened. Do you get it? So the motion will always be set in a way that whatever you're regretting has already been happening. So the status quo has that thing that you regret. So opposition's role is to defend status quo, is to defend the world as it exists today with the thing that you regret. Yeah? Does that make sense, or did I just complicate it for you?
That's clear. Thank you.
Okay, all right. Ishita?
Yeah, I wanted to ask that during the debate, can we ask for some source of information or evidence card?
No, like I said, evidence really doesn't matter in parliamentary debates. Don't go around scrounging for objective data analysis. Nobody cares in parliamentary debates about any like statistics or data. Don't even like bother mentioning 70% of the people do this, 72% do that, because it's just absolutely unnecessary and superfluous in parliamentary debates. It's everything is just your reasoning, right? So for example, I said international NGOs have better resources. Now, I didn't ask whoever gave that argument. I did not ask them to give me facts, right? They just gave me some reasoning. They said they are well established. They have been there since the 1930s or whatever, a post World War phase, and they are funded by Western world, which is why it makes me believe. I mean, there is some validity to this claim of resourcefulness, right? Because you are supported by the best actors in the world, so you're probably resourceful. That's enough for me to buy that point. You don't have to give me data.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Pulkita?
Ma'am, I had a question that in the this house will do motions. You said we have to like propose some motions. Can you give an example?
Like you have to give a model is what I said. You want an example of a model?
Yeah, sort of.
Okay, let's say the motion was this house will make voting compulsory. Okay. Simple, right? This house will make voting compulsory. What will a potential model look like? Let me think. Okay. I think I got one. So if I am the government side, I will say that we as the government of a country will mandate voting by ensuring that we keep records of people who vote regularly. If they fail to do that, we will withdraw all the privileges that a citizen is like eligible for. For example, if I want to register my company with the government, I can't do it before I show like my any proof of like having voted diligently and sincerely for the past 5 years. Do you get it? So that's my model. I'm saying I'm not going to go from like house to house or person to person checking for their voting records. But what I'm definitely going to do is before giving them any government privileges or benefits which a democracy is supposed to give to their citizen, I'm going to check for their voting history as well. So if I have to give you, for example, in COVID, there was public healthcare facilities. If I will give you a bed in Safdarjung or AIMS, it's only going to be on the basis of how sincerely you voted. Do you get it? So that's my model. Because opposition could easily say that how will you mandate voting? I mean, there's so many people in India. How will you keep a track of everybody voting or not voting? Which is a legitimate concern. Which is why I'm saying I'm not going to go like person by person. All that I'm going to do is I'm not going to give you the privileges that you could have had you been a sincere voter. So now I don't have to check everybody for everybody if they're voting every time. Because if I want to start a business, let's say 5 years down the line, I will start voting from this year onwards because I know I want a good track record, right? It's just like how credit card payment dues work, right? Now, credit card companies don't go about saying that, oh, you need to give us our money back. They just say that interest rate is huge. So just like, please rethink if you want to delay paying your dues, right? That's the kind of deterrence that you want to introduce in people so that the people do the thing themselves. You don't have to run behind them. So that's my model. Does that make sense, Pulkita?
Yes, ma'am. Just one more question. If, for example, the OG proposes a model, so like, will the CG give a new model or it can extend on it?
You can give a new model. You can also extend, but preferably, I mean, you can give new impact of the existing model, right? Or you could give a new model. Either way works.
Okay, ma'am. Thank you.
Yeah, but again, clarification. You can't contradict the OG model by giving a new model from your side. It has to like sit well with the OG model. You can say that whatever OG's model says is fine, but we think we can enrich it by introducing these new things in the model. That's how.
Okay, ma'am.
All right, then I think we can call it a day if there are no other questions. Thank you so much for joining in. And it's a wrap. I think the training sessions are just over. So good luck for the BP qualifiers. And yeah, see you all there. Bye.
Do we have a session tomorrow?
We don't.
Mom, don't we have a quiz tomorrow?
We do have a quiz about which you will be shortly notified on the WhatsApp group. So please be on the lookout for that.
Okay, thanks. Thank you, Mom.
You're welcome.